You're now in the Lautering process. And here we want to separate the liquid from the solid part. This is done by using some kind of a sieve. The filtering itself is necessarily also being done through the spent grain to gain more sugars out of the trester and to have a better filtering result. So this can be done directly in the mash tun. You may just add there a bag, like a brewing bag, or a Lautering sieve, or a Lautering spiral. But you can do that also in a separate lauter tun, which gives you the advantage that you lauter the final wort directly back into the kettle where you are boiling later, and you save some time in heating up. If you use a separate lauter tun that has additional advantages, you can select a kettle which is insulated. You can have an insulated kettle at all, which is a thermoport. This is good because when the temperature is falling down, you have a not so good viscosity anymore. For a quick lauter result, the temperature shall remain stable, and you select a lauter tun which is not too high, because otherwise you have pretty much a hydrostatic pressure on the spent grain. So the tiny channels which shall pass the wort through the trester will be more narrow, and then the lautering will go slower. This is what you want to avoid. This could also happen if you are lautering from your lauter tun into the mash kettle with a hose, and the hose is in the wort, and then you will have a sucking pressure, which is almost the same result. However, you just can easily avoid it by keeping the hose a bit outside of the wort. Furthermore, you have different systems. You can use a lauter sieve or a lauter spiral. The result is almost the same. But still, you are filtrating most of the mash through the spent grain, the husks specifically. Therefore, the first liter or two or more of your lautering process is the so-called Vorlauf. This may be pretty hazy, so let it go into a beaker, put it back into the lauter tun gently. Having a lot of chaotic disturbance in your lauter tun could lead to further haze. Once it's pretty clear, let it run into your boiling kettle. By the lautering, the first what you receive as a wort is pretty high in gravity, extract or sugars. So that's why you give so-called sparge water, which is just water at 78 degrees most likely, because you want to keep the viscosity and temperature high. But also not too high, because above 80 degrees you get flavor from the husks, which is more or less negative for your final beer. For sparging, you do it in a way that you are lautering until you have 1 or 2 centimeters of wort left on your spent grain. Then you can close the valve and start the sparging. Afterwards, you're letting it run again into your boiling kettle. You can do that 2 or 3 times, it depends on the recipe or the size of the lauter tun. Never let the spent grain run dry, because this will suck the small channels for lautering altogether and you have a break in your lauter process. The solution for that is usually you fill up the water and then you use a knife, and then you can build new channels to run through. And once you have done the last sparge, you can let it run off completely to the final kettle. If you just stick to the recipe, you may just follow the instructions of water and grain in your recipe. If you want to have more control about your process, or in future design your own recipes, you need to measure the gravity. This can be done by an hydrometer, or also called areometer, or spindle. Therefore, you need the hydrometer and a cylinder where you collect a certain amount of wort, cool it down to 20 degrees, and at 20 degrees you measure it in either degree Plato, which is more common in Germany, or a specific gravity, which is more internationally used. You can also use a refractometer. The refractometer is just using 3 drops of your wort. So this goes quickly and it's automatically temperature controlled. So you're reading a result which is an index called Brix, which is also measuring, like the spindle, basically the density. But Brix is not the same as SG, and it's close to degree Plato. Use the calculators you can find online, it's really helpful. Which is specifically needed if you want to measure your young beer with a refractometer. Because there you will have a mistake in your measurement induced by alcohol. You can, by taking the original gravity and the final gravity, make a pretty correct calculation of the remaining sugar and the derived alcohol. But you have to use a proper calculator for that. Afterwards, after sparge water has run off into your kettle, we move to the next step, which is the boiling.